Late August 1944, Observation Post 4, Pardal, France. At the dawn of a late August morning in 1944, the intelligence sheets lay discarded on a cluttered desk at Flak Regiment 155W as German technical officers struggled to make sense of the figures before them. The reported interception rates of incoming attacks were so high that they defied the entire body of ballistic theory taught in Luftwaffe schools across Germany. According to the calculations, 82% of the V-1 flying bombs approaching London had been neutralized, a number that seemed impossible to reconcile with existing knowledge. From their observation points, German spotters watched the skies with field telescopes, noting events that contradicted everything their reconnaissance and intelligence had claimed about Allied anti-aircraft capabilities. The pre-dawn V-1 launches aimed at London were being destroyed at levels that no conventional tactics could explain. The missiles were not being intercepted by fighters executing risky pursuit maneuvers, nor were they being entangled in barrage balloon defenses. Instead, they were being obliterated by the coordinated fire of the coastal anti-aircraft batteries. Shells detonated with extraordinary precision, exploding near the V-1s in mid-air without requiring direct hits, a phenomenon that seemed to violate known physics. At the headquarters of Flak Regiment 155W in the Château d'Otto, the commander overseeing the V-1 offensive, Max Wettel, reviewed the incoming reports with mounting concern. Over the span of the German V-1 campaign, the effectiveness of the coastal gun defenses had increased dramatically, from intercepting only 17% of missiles in June to 74% by late August, and peaking at an astonishing 82% on one extraordinary day during the final week of August 1944. This sudden surge in effectiveness represented a profound shock to the German weapons scientists, challenging everything they believed about the limitations of their own missile defense theories. What Wettel and his technical staff did not realize was that they were witnessing the operational impact of one of the most tightly guarded technological secrets of the Second World War. The Allies had deployed a device so advanced that its development was classified at the same level as the atomic bomb. Known as the proximity fuse, or VT, variable time fuse in Allied terminology, this invention allowed anti-aircraft shells to detonate at the precise moment needed to destroy V-1 missiles, achieving levels of accuracy that German physicists had deemed unattainable. The roots of this breakthrough trace back 10 weeks earlier, on June 13, 1944, exactly 1 week after the Normandy landings. In response to the Allied invasion, Hitler had unleashed his long-promised Vergeltungswaffe terror weapon against London at 4:25 a.m. On that day, the first V-1 missile struck Grove Road in Bow, obliterating a railway bridge, damaging nearby homes and causing 6 fatalities, 30 injuries, and leaving 200 people without shelter. This marked the beginning of the V-1 offensive, a campaign that would soon collide with a technological innovation capable of systematically neutralizing Hitler's weapon with unprecedented precision. The V-1 flying bomb represented the culmination of years of German engineering and innovation during World War II. This pilotless weapon, propelled by an Argus AS-109-014 pulsejet engine, carried roughly 850 kilograms of amatol and could travel at speeds of about 640 kilometers per hour. It holds the distinction of being the first operational cruise missile in military history. German High Command was convinced that its deployment could decisively cripple Britain. Major Walter Dornberger, who oversaw the Volkswagen-led weapons development program at Peenemünde, estimated that even assuming a modest success rate of 25%, the V-1 would deliver a level of explosive force on London surpassing the entire Blitz campaigns of 1940 and 1941. Production costs were relatively minimal. Each missile cost approximately 5,000 Reichsmarks, significantly less than an equivalent bomber mission, while also eliminating the risk to aircrews. At the Peenemünde Army Research Center, confidence in the weapon's potential was high. German scientists had already achieved breakthroughs in rocketry, developed operational jet aircraft, and now introduced the first functional cruise missile. Dr. Robert Lusser, the engineer behind the V-1's guidance system, concluded that interception by Allied forces would be extraordinarily difficult. The missile maintained speeds of 640 km and operated at altitudes ranging from 600 to 2,700 meters. British fighter aircraft needed to exceed 650 km to overtake the V-1, and even then pilots had to approach within 200 meters to attempt a kill, risking detonation from the missile itself. Anti-aircraft artillery presented an equally daunting challenge. Calculations suggested that a direct hit on such a small, fast-moving target was unlikely, with probabilities estimated at less than 1 in 10,000 shells. Conventional time-fused munitions required precise prediction, careful manual settings, and perfect timing, all nearly impossible against a weapon traveling at such high speed, leaving gunners with a window of roughly half a minute from detection to engagement. Max Vachtal, commander of Flak Regiment 155W, had first-hand knowledge of these challenges. During the V-1 campaign, German forces launched a total of 9,521 missiles from ground-based sites against England, with thousands more aimed at other locations, summing to an estimated 25,000 V-1s second deployed throughout the conflict. Initial intelligence reports from the first launches raised concerns. British air defences were adapting more quickly than anticipated. By late June, interception rates climbed from an expected 10% to 24%. While this increase could be rationalised, the following month produced results that defied German expectations. Technical officers tracking missile effectiveness were astonished to see British artillery claiming V-1 destructions with remarkably low ammunition expenditure. Witnesses along the French coast described the phenomenon. V-1 missiles travelling steadily toward England would suddenly encounter flak bursts and fall from the sky, despite the explosions occurring at distances that should have rendered direct impact impossible. These early observations signaled the beginning of a new, highly effective phase in Allied air defence, one that German engineers had not fully anticipated. German intelligence remained unaware that they were observing the effects of proximity fuses, a technological innovation that converted near misses into lethal hits. This advancement had been actively deployed in the Pacific Theater as early as January 1943, when the USS Helena successfully downed a Japanese dive bomber using artillery shells designed to detonate upon nearing their target. The failure of German intelligence to recognize the significance of this technology was thorough and persistent. Although the Oslo report of November 1939 referenced ongoing research into proximity fuses, German scientists dismissed it outright, considering it likely enemy propaganda. Germany itself had made multiple attempts to develop comparable systems, experimenting with more than 30 different fuse designs. None of these efforts reached operational status. German engineers ultimately deemed proximity fuses impractical, concluding that the technical obstacles were beyond their capabilities. These challenges included reducing radio transmitter receivers to fit inside artillery shells, engineering vacuum tubes capable of surviving accelerations exceeding 20,000 Gs, designing batteries that could remain dormant for years yet still activate reliably, and establishing methods for large-scale manufacturing. Despite these obstacles, by August 1944, American industry had achieved a remarkable feat, producing roughly 40,000 VT variable time fuses each day. In the final week of that month, the fuse reached its peak effectiveness. The British had restructured their entire anti-aircraft defense apparatus, integrating American 84 radar units to provide automated target tracking. Most importantly, they equipped their artillery with VT fuses specifically adapted to counter the V-1 flying bombs. British artillery units, including the Royal Artillery and RAF regiments, relocated from positions in the North Downs to the southern coast of England, forming a dense defensive belt. This strategic positioning ensured that any shells failing to detonate would fall into the sea, preventing the Germans from recovering them. As V-1s crossed the coastline, they entered a highly controlled kill zone where technological superiority vastly outmatched the enemy's statistical expectations. The SCR-584 radar system automatically acquired and tracked targets, calculated firing solutions, and relayed them to guns. The VT fuses contained miniature radio transmitters developed by Sylvania Electric and Western Electric, which could detect proximity through reflected signals. Once the system confirmed sufficient closeness to a target, Theratron switches activated the detonators, sending steel fragments through the V-1 structure. On the most effective day in late August, British coastal batteries destroyed an unprecedented 82% of incoming V-1 missiles, a performance German engineers had considered unattainable. Such extraordinary interception rates triggered alarm at German command. Wary of sabotage, they conducted emergency inspections of their missile systems, finding no mechanical faults. Test launches over German-controlled territory confirmed normal performance. The anomaly only became evident against the fortified British defences. German experts eventually surmised that the Allies had deployed revolutionary anti-aircraft technology, but, without physical examples, they could not determine the precise mechanisms responsible. Despite repeated adjustments in tactics altering flight altitudes, increasing salvo sizes, launching attacks at night, and attempting to leverage adverse weather conditions, the results remained catastrophically one-sided. At the Peenemünde testing range, Allied scientists confronted a stark reality. Their proximity fuse had accomplished what German engineers had long deemed unattainable. German intelligence intensified efforts to penetrate this secret, yet all attempts failed. The security surrounding the proximity fuse was nearly flawless. Its production was meticulously segmented across 110 separate factories with workers assigned only to highly specialized tasks. Even the term variable time was intentionally misleading, implying a traditional timed mechanism rather than a sophisticated sensor-based system. By 1944, nearly the entire US electronics sector was engaged in the manufacture of these fuses. By the end of the war, more than 22 million units would be produced, at a cumulative cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency. The Crosley Corporation alone accounted for over 5 million fuses, nearly 1/4 of the total output. These numbers highlighted a profound industrial asymmetry. While Germany struggled with the mass production of V-1 rockets using coerced labor, the United States had mobilized its electronics industry to manufacture cutting-edge devices on a scale never before seen. At peak production, up to 40,000 fuses were completed daily, and the unit cost plummeted from $732 in 1942 to just $18 by 1945. Crosley, which had previously been known for radios and refrigerators, employed 10,000 workers to produce 16,000 fuses per day at full capacity. Sylvania Electric, on the other hand, dedicated its entire vacuum tube research team to creating durable miniature components capable of surviving extreme conditions, ultimately producing 400,000 tiny tubes daily covering 95% of the fuse's electronic requirements. The contrast between the nations was stark. Germany's weapons were individually handcrafted and limited in quantity, while the United States mass-produced revolutionary technology with unprecedented precision and efficiency. In fact, the monthly output of American proximity fuses alone surpassed Germany's total V-1 rocket production for the entire duration of the conflict. Engineering the proximity fuse presented enormous technical hurdles. Each unit had to endure a gun launch acceleration of 20,000 g, rotational speeds of 25,000 rpm, and extreme temperature variations. Sylvania adapted miniature vacuum tubes originally designed for hearing aids, reinforcing them to survive these forces. The batteries remained inert for years, only activating the instant the device was needed. At the core of the fuse, a tiny radio continuously emitted signals. When the reflections indicated the presence of a nearby target, the circuitry would trigger detonation. What seemed deceptively straightforward demanded solutions German engineers had considered impossible. Quality control standards were exceptionally rigorous. Every fuse underwent multiple inspections, and random samples were test-fired in actual guns. With rejection rates below 2%, the achievement demonstrated both extraordinary manufacturing precision and the ability to operate at scale. By September 1944, this technological breakthrough had effectively neutralized the German V-1 offensive. Out of the 9,521 V-1 flying bombs launched from German positions targeting Britain, only about 2,515 successfully reached London. These strikes resulted in the deaths of 6,184 civilians and injured nearly 18,000 more. While these numbers were tragic, they reflected only a small fraction of the destruction Germany had aimed to inflict. General Frederick Pyle, who commanded Britain's anti-aircraft defenses, estimated that if proximity fuses had not been employed, the casualty figures could have been 4 to 5 times greater. The introduction of this technology was pivotal, preventing London from facing widespread devastation. In response, Germany began launching V-1s under cover of night and accelerated the development of the V-2 rocket, which traveled at speeds too great for interception. Nevertheless, these last-ditch efforts failed to achieve any significant strategic effect. The V-1 campaign, in particular, proved costly, consuming substantial resources that were urgently needed elsewhere. One of the most striking aspects of this episode was the German inability to identify and understand proximity fuses, marking one of the most remarkable intelligence failures in military history. Despite extensive reconnaissance networks and advanced technical expertise, German forces remained entirely unaware of the nature of the threat they confronted. The proximity fuse program remained highly classified throughout the war, and not a single complete fuse ever fell into German hands during the V-1 offensive. Even during the Battle of the Bulge, when German troops captured an American ammunition depot containing these devices, they failed to recognize their purpose. The German assumption that such technology was impossible blinded them to the evidence literally in front of them. After Germany's surrender, interrogations revealed their complete ignorance. Max Wachtel, a German officer, admitted to Allied interrogators that while they suspected improved radar systems or faster mechanical fuses, the concept of an autonomous, self-activating shell had never occurred to them. When German scientists were shown captured American VT variable time fuses, they expressed disbelief. They could not fathom how a fuse could survive the intense forces of launch, maintain a functioning battery, and retain operational circuitry after firing. German analysts later estimated that they lagged roughly a decade behind American technology. Dr. Merle Tuve, who oversaw the development of proximity fuses at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, later reflected that the project's success stemmed from meticulous coordination among scientists, engineers, and production teams, a level of systematic collaboration that authoritarian regimes struggled to achieve. The impacts of the proximity fuse underscored the reality that the outcome of World War II was determined not only on battlefields but equally in laboratories and industrial plants. While Germany poured resources into exotic wonder weapons, the United States prioritized technologies that enhanced the efficiency and effectiveness of existing armaments. The proximity fuse, in particular, amplified the lethality of anti-aircraft artillery by a factor of 5 to 10. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal later emphasized its strategic significance, stating that the device had been instrumental in accelerating operations against Japan, providing crucial protection for naval forces and significantly reducing casualties and equipment losses. The production of V-1 rockets came at a human cost. Tens of thousands of forced laborers from concentration camps perished in the underground factories that manufactured these weapons. In stark contrast, American factory workers voluntarily put in long hours for additional pay, often without full knowledge of the specific purpose of their labor, yet understanding that it contributed to the war effort. At the Sylvania facility in Ipswich, for example, more than 5,000 women worked 12-hour shifts producing intricate components for proximity fuses. Only after the conflict ended did they learn that their work had directly contributed to saving London from destruction. Secrecy surrounding the proximity fuse was absolute. Even British anti-aircraft crews were unaware of the exact mechanism that made their ammunition so effective. Each shell containing a proximity fuse was carefully accounted for, and unexploded ordnance was immediately secured. Naval patrols in the English Channel prevented Germans from recovering any dud rounds. The insistence on maintaining this secrecy came at a cost. Allied ground units were unable to employ proximity-fused artillery in combat until December 1944. Yet this extreme caution ensured that the technological advantage remained uncompromised, highlighting the decisive role of innovation and information security in the Allied victory. During World War II, countless soldiers lost their lives because certain advanced technologies were deemed too sensitive to deploy in conventional combat. However, when it came to countering Germany's V-1 flying bombs, employing such technology was considered essential. The survival of London during the Blitz was a strategic necessity for the Allies, and the defense against the V-1s highlighted this urgency. From Germany's perspective, the V-1 program consumed vast amounts of manpower, materials, and money while producing only marginal strategic advantage. In total, approximately 25,000 V-1 missiles were launched, costing the Reich millions of marks and diverting critical resources away from fighter aircraft and anti-tank weapons, both desperately needed on increasingly strained battlefronts. The program's dependence on forced labor further complicated its legacy, adding an ethical dimension to its operational shortcomings. The development of the proximity fuse ultimately rendered weapons produced through human suffering less effective, a fact fully appreciated only after the war ended. The proximity fuse itself marked a pivotal shift in military strategy. Success was no longer solely determined by the quality of individual weapons or the bravery of soldiers, but by the capacity to engineer and mass-produce highly advanced technology. This innovation demonstrated that modern warfare had become a competition of industrial might as much as of battlefield tactics. Before its deployment in Europe, the fuse had already shown its value in the Pacific, saving ships and contributing to Japan's eventual defeat. In London, it turned the tide against the V-1 threat, leaving German observers baffled. The concept behind the technology was beyond the scientific framework available to Germany, making the results almost unimaginable from their perspective. Before the introduction of proximity fuses, intercepting a single V-1 required around 2,500 heavy anti-aircraft shells. With the new fuses, this number dropped dramatically to roughly 100 shells per interception. The effectiveness of anti-aircraft defenses soared. Within just 10 weeks, the hit rate of gunbelt systems climbed from 17% to 82%. This leap in performance was not the result of superior training or extraordinary courage, but rather the mass production of a sophisticated technological solution on a scale Germany could neither replicate nor fully understand. The United States mobilized its entire electronics sector, employing over 80,000 workers and investing more than $1 billion to manufacture 22 million proximity fuses. The success of the technology lay in this industrial-scale effort. Following the war, the proximity fuse was finally declassified in September 1945, revealing the crucial role it had played in saving London and redefining the conduct of modern combat. In a pivotal announcement from the War Department, one of the Second World War's most significant technological innovations was revealed, an invention whose impact on the battlefield was second only to the atomic bomb. For German engineers who had labored to perfect the V-1 flying bomb, the revelation was both enlightening and humiliating. Their supposedly invincible weapon had not been overcome by superior tactics, heroic defense, or battlefield skill, but by an industrial-scale technological advancement they had never anticipated. Post-war testimonies from German scientists exposed the depth of their disbelief. They had assumed their V-1 represented the apex of wartime innovation, only to learn that it had been neutralized by mass-produced electronic devices costing less than $20 apiece. The realization was crushing. Defeat had come not from bravery or strategy, but from the sheer capacity of American factories to produce effective technology in vast quantities. The proximity fuse, the technology responsible for this disruption, later evolved into critical components of modern military systems, including air defense networks, radar altimeters, and electronic warfare equipment. For those who had once designed Germany's advanced weapons, the fuse remained a stark lesson in the limits of individual brilliance when faced with mass production. The fundamental lesson was clear: in modern conflict, producing a vast number of functional, reliable weapons often outweighs the pursuit of a few technically flawless marvels. Germany could engineer extraordinary devices, but the United States leveraged its industrial infrastructure to deploy effective weapons on an unprecedented scale. Late in August 1944, the efficacy of this approach became undeniable. The deployment of proximity fuses resulted in the destruction of roughly 82% of German V-1s targeting London. The consequences were immediate and profound, marking a turning point in the history of warfare. The Germans, launching their so-called vengeance weapons, were unaware that their sophisticated missiles were being intercepted by an invisible network of small electronic devices. Every attempt at precision and advancement, every elite crew, every engineering breakthrough was nullified by mass-produced electronics beyond their imagination. Thousands of miniature automated detonations saved London, each explosion orchestrated by technology German scientists had believed impossible. The triumph belonged to industrial democracy rather than to individual genius or totalitarian precision, to widespread production over singularly crafted ingenuity. Complex, expensive weapons had been neutralized by simpler, more numerous technological solutions. The Germans never discovered the true nature of the threat as their V-1s fell from the sky, aflame and broken. For them, it was as if the war was being decided by forces beyond comprehension, a combination of unseen science and industrial capacity they could not replicate. The proximity fuse, seemingly modest, had transformed Hitler's instrument of retribution into a lifeline for London, and the creators of the V-1 could not grasp how or why until much later, long after the outcome had been decided. Ultimately, the greatest American victory of the era was not won on front lines but in factories. Millions of workers, many of them women without full knowledge of their final product, assembled tiny electronic devices that collectively altered the course of the conflict and forever changed the nature of warfare. The 82% interception rate achieved in August 1944 stood as irrefutable proof. In the modern age, a nation's capacity to produce and deploy technology can surpass even the most ingenious weapons crafted by its adversaries. The proximity fuse became more than a mere defensive tool. It was a testament to the power of democratic industrial mobilization, demonstrating that widespread coordination of science and manufacturing could overcome the forced brilliance imposed by totalitarian regimes. For the Germans, watching their perfect weapons destroyed, the defeat was total and invisible. By the time they realized what had transpired, the war had already been decided not on the basis of individual innovation, but through the relentless, tireless machinery of collective production.